Thank you, everybody, for taking your seats. We're about to get the event started. I'm Tony DeGenis. I am an Archon. I'm a member of the Patriarchal Properties and Legal Issues Committee, which is sponsoring this event. To begin, the most important way, let's start with a prayer. Father.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, now and forever, and unto the ages of ages. Amen.
Amen. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Andy Manitos, who is a regional commander of the Archons, to give his welcoming remarks. Andy is also referred, in Washington at least, as the 101st Senator.
I'll be very brief. I was thinking there might be more non-involved people here tonight. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that who these problems are dealing with. I mean, we've really got to remind ourselves, this is the 169th direct successor of the Apostle Andrew. He's a man who, when the Congress gave him the Congressional Gold Medal, more senators and members co-sponsored his bill than any other bill introduced in that Congress. He speaks 6 to 8 languages. He's such an extraordinary person that to treat him the way they do is just that much worse. The other reason I'm here is because the person I'm going to introduce, who is the one that's heading this legal and real estate committee, is from the part of Greece where the best people come from, the island of Crete, as we all know. So let me introduce Joe Kokalakis.
Thank you, Mr. Manitos. Thank you so much. I'm half Cretan, half Chioti. Depending on where I am in the United States is the one that I focus on. So, but I'm proud to be a Cretan. It is my distinct honor to welcome you all. I want to thank you all for coming here. This is a tremendous opportunity to learn more about the Patriarchate and about the struggles that the Patriarchate has to work through on a daily basis. I'm chairman of the Patriarchal Properties Committee and Legal Affairs. And we have subcommittees, one of those subcommittees being legal identity, the issue of legal identity and how it impacts the Ecumenical Patriarchate. The chair of that subcommittee is your keynote speaker tonight, Mr. George Kounoupis. We're honored to have him be the speaker tonight. He will introduce one of the other speakers that we have tonight. But George's, all Archons get a officion, which is their kind of, their name that represents, that's bestowed upon them by the Ecumenical Patriarchate. George's officion is Archon Diakophylax. Diakophylax, which actually I looked up, and it translates to guardian of the law, which is exactly, it's the most appropriate officion that I could imagine. It's actually a Byzantine judicial office through the 11th and 15th centuries. So in a sense, George is the second judge that will be speaking tonight because based on your officion, you are a judge. So from now on, I'll just refer to you as judge. George is, in addition to being chair and an Archon of the Ecumenical Patriarchate and chair of the Committee of Legal Identity, he is a practiced international and comparative USA Greek law attorney. He is a member of both the Greek and, Pennsylvania, Jersey bar associations. Did you have to take the Greek bar in Greek?
Yes.
Wow. So that alone is a tremendous achievement. He's on the ABA International Law section. He's the liaison for Greece. He's the former chair of the ABA Lawyers Practicing Abroad Committee. He's a fellow of the American Bar Foundation, as well as a fellow of the Litigation Council of America and a member of the World Law Alliance, among multiple awards and recognitions. He's obviously a recognized, a trial attorney, with over $70 million recovered for his clients. He graduated from Lehigh University, and his law degree is from Temple University. After completing advanced legal studies in Athens Law School, which I thought is a tremendous achievement, Greek legal scholar Ispiliotopoulos was his mentor, and he worked with him to pass, the Greek bar. And I think we're all fortunate to have him speak to us tonight. He's written a tremendous, we're calling it a white paper, but in a sense, it's almost a treatise. It is, not because it's long, because it's about 50 pages. He printed on his own and brought 30 copies of this tremendous document. And it is an easy read in spite of being 50 papers, because it's written in a language that we can all understand. We have 30 copies here. He has it digitally that he can send to everyone if they would like it. I urge you to take it and to read it, and because the issues that he raises, and more importantly, the conclusions and the call to action of his paper is something that we should all take to heart. I share, our regional commander Manitos's, we hate to be preaching to the choir. I hope that the students, the Georgetown students, the students that are here take this message and distribute it. You're all should look at this as your pilgrims or apostles, and the message that you're going to hear tonight, it does nothing if it just stays here. The only way we will accomplish something and actually impact change for His All Holiness in Constantinople is if you take what you hear today and you share it with your congressmen, your senators, your all local leaders that you have. So with that, I'd like to welcome my friend, my committee member, and the chair of the Legal Identity Subcommittee, George S. Kounoupis. Thank you.
First of all, thank you. I'm very grateful to be here on this issue that's very near and dear to our hearts. The chairs of this committee are responsible of the legal committee for this, Ted Kakoyannis and Joseph Kokolakis. Without them, nothing would have happened. And locally, since we're all New York and Philly and Florida people, the esteemed lawyer Anthony Ginnis set this all up. We don't have that kind of connections in D.C. Everyone is here because of Anthony and his connections. We're honored to have Mr. Manitos here. If you don't know that name, then you've been under a rock somewhere. It's synonymous with influence in the Greek community. We talked about knowing him from 1995. And esteemed Archons and esteemed students and individuals who are here. But before we go any further, we've had the great fortune, you can't imagine what a great fortune this is, to have probably the most knowledgeable person in the country, and I say this, she may not admit it, on this issue. And this is the senior judge, Delissa Ridgway, who is here. Delissa Ridgway, Judge Ridgway, is the senior judge on the U.S. Court of International Trade. She followed Judge Tsoukalos. But her resume on Wikipedia is, 35 pages. All I'm going to tell you is in the ABA, when it comes to religious freedom and rule of law, which this issue is, there is no one greater, no one more respected than Judge Ridgway. It's a shame she can only speak for 15, 20 minutes. Otherwise, I'm going to run out of time. But she should really give the whole speech. But I have the greatest honor, and I'm so appreciative. And not only is she the best that you're going to get in this, but she's also the most wonderful human being and person you could ever imagine. I just love the judge. I'm so grateful that she's here. And so I'd like the judge say a few words. Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor. Appreciate it.
Wow, what kind words. I need to sit down now. As they would say, that is an introduction that my father would appreciate and my mother would believe. George has already taken one of the points that I was going to begin with, but there are a couple of quick matters before I get to the substance of our program this evening. First, for more than 25 years, anywhere I go, when my court has been referenced, I've joked that it's the stealth court, that nobody had any idea who we were or what we did, and I would parenthetically say that includes our Court of Appeals. But of course now, with the recent landmark decision by my court, I was not on the panel, but the recent landmark decision by my court in the tariffs case, which was just heard yesterday at the U.S. Supreme Court, where my court ruled that the international, I never get this right, anyway, the IEEPA, the law on emergency economic powers, that the president, was not entitled to rely on it. Anyway, that decision originated in my court and has now wended its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And like all of you, I will be watching very closely to see what the court decides in that case. In any event, though, I no longer have to introduce it as the stealth court and give these long explanations about who we are and what we do. The other point that I was going to make, the other major point, was just my connection to Judge Tsoukalos, the fact that the seat that I held as an active judge, I'm now senior judge, but as an active judge on the Court of International Trade, is a seat that I inherited directly from Judge Tsoukalos. I took his seat that he left vacant when he took senior status, and as all of us in this room know, he was a legend in legal and political circles in New York and beyond, and really just a legend nationwide. I'll parenthetically say that he was also a legend in restaurant circles. Anytime, I learned very quickly when I moved to New York that anytime I was making a restaurant reservation, I needed to just note that I was a judge on the Court of International Trade in the most polite way possible. But anyway, it would inevitably, evoke the response, "Oh, Nick's court." So I have that. Apropos of our topic tonight, I will also just note parenthetically that I have participated in a number of independent international human rights missions to Turkey in recent years, mostly observing trials of dissidents, often mass trials. We all know that there has been a precipitous decline in the rule of law under Erdogan, particularly in recent years, post the attempted coup, and also visiting and documenting the conditions in prisons throughout Turkey. But I've engaged in, conversations with a lot of the human rights activists in the country, and that's part of the community that I want to work with George and his committee to help mobilize, but a little bit more on that later. In any event, and I'm going to be looking closely at my notes here, and I've got to say that every time I do notes, I have to make the print bigger and bigger and bigger, and I'm just going to name one of the fonts, Senior Citizens, like we have Roman, and so I'm going to invent my own font, but please bear with me and apologize. In any event, back in June of this year, Michael Rubin, who's the director of policy analysis at the Middle East Forum, testified before U.S. Congress at a hearing on human rights in Turkey today that was held by the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. And in his testimony, Rubin shared one of the stories that's making the rounds in Turkey today among the Turkish people. It seems that a Turkish professor made a statement that President Erdogan did not like, which happens a lot. In short order, the professor found himself sentenced to prison for 20 years. And the story goes that he visits the prison library on his first day there with a list of the books that he wants to read while he is serving his sentence. The librarian looks over the list and shakes his head and apologizes. "I'm so sorry, we don't have any of these books," he says. "We only have their authors." As Reuben has emphasized, that joke really strikes a little bit close to home. As he puts it, after more than 2 decades of Erdogan's rule, the Turkey that was once a U.S. ally and an aspiring democracy is forever gone. And all of the various rule of law indices and democracy indices bear this out. Turkey has just been plummeting in recent years. The most recent was the World Justice Project, which just put out the results of its rule of law index last week, and Turkey has plummeted even further. There are precious few countries on the planet that rank below Turkey now. It's a very sad situation. In any event, Reuben continued, so too is the idea that a liberalized Turkey might embrace religious and ethnic diversity. Reuben's testimony is much broader than our topic tonight, but I commend it to you in its entirety. It's pretty easy to find on the internet. There's one section in particular, though, that's of special interest to us, which is captioned, "Erdogan targets Greeks in Turkey for extinction." With profound thanks to him and with your indulgence, I'm going to sort of spend a fair amount of my limited time tonight recapping some of the high points of his testimony as a brief introduction to George's presentation. As we all know, and as Reuben's testimony explains, under the terms of the 1923 Treaty of Lausanne, Turkey recognized 4 ethnic minorities: Greeks, Armenians, Bulgarians, and Jews. And Reuben opines, again, parenthetically, ironically, that of all of those minorities, the Kurds may be the best off, although he notes that, in his words, such a statement is akin to suggesting that someone with cancer is better off than a victim of Ebola. Reuben analogizes the story of the Greek minority in Turkey as illustrative of the decline of Christianity in the country. He highlights the fact that Greeks were in Asia Minor and on the Aegean coast like centuries before the Turks arrived, and in the Ottoman Empire's final decade, the Greek Christian presence in what eventually became Turkey numbered more than 2 million. Istanbul, Constantinople, was the seat of the Patriarch, the spiritual head of the 300 Orthodox Christians worldwide, and Reuben observes that the Biden administration, all 50 states in the United States, and the District of Columbia have formally and rightly recognized the Armenian genocide, but the Armenians, he points out, were not alone in suffering genocide at the hands of the Turks in the last decades of the Ottoman Empire and the first years of modern Turkey. As Reuben puts it, Greeks in Turkey suffered, his words, a 30-year genocide which claimed 1 million, more than 1 million Greek lives, half the population. The exchange of population that then followed the founding of the Republic of Turkey forced much of the remaining Greek Orthodox population to leave Anatolia. Only 2,000 Greeks, roughly, remain in Turkey today, mostly in Istanbul. And Reuben underscores that this decline in population has parallels only in the decimation of the Jewish population in Eastern Europe during the Holocaust. But we don't think of it. You don't often hear about it spoken that way. The Republic of Turkey, of course, is now more than a century old, yet the Greek minority remains at risk throughout the country. Notwithstanding the global significance of the Ecumenical Patriarch, Turkey denies legal status, legal identity to the Patriarch. This lack of legal identity, as George will explain in much greater detail, constrains the Patriarchate in every detail. Turkey refuses to recognize the Patriarchate's ownership rights and refuses to issue residence and work permits for, and this I put in quotation marks, foreign priests who are essential, obviously, to the continuity and to the functioning of the Patriarchate. As Rubin puts it, and again I'm going to quote, Turkey's blockage of the Ecumenical Patriarchate is, in essence, equivalent to both Italy, again his example, refusing to allow non-Italian cardinals visas to transit through Italy on their way to the Vatican City. That's one of his analogies. And the second is disputing the Vatican's ownership of its own buildings. So again, pretty stark examples when you compare to Italy. Turkey refuses even to recognize the Patriarchate's ownership of its churches. And Rubin points out that even as the world's Catholics celebrate the selection of Pope Leo XIV as the United States' first pope, the first American pope, Turkey has the temerity to demand that each ecumenical patriarch be a Turkish citizen. For more than a decade, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom has categorized Turkey as among the worst violators of religious freedom on the planet, largely because of the country's treatment of its Greek Orthodox minority. The situation has significantly deteriorated under Erdogan, which has led the Commission to list Turkey as a, quote, country of particular concern. And as Rubin testified before Congress, much as Putin uses the Russian Orthodox Church to further Russian foreign policy, so too Erdogan cynically supports the Russian Orthodox Church in order to diminish the Greek Church, further undermining the integrity and the future of the Patriarchate. Rubin concluded his testimony. We heard earlier about stark warnings and calls to action. My exact words. This is what Rubin used to conclude his testimony before Congress. It is now more essential than ever for the White House and Congress to elevate the issue of religious freedom without his words of caution, without the Halki Seminary, which Turkey has shuttered tragically for more than 50 years, the Greek Orthodox Church cannot train priests domestically. And he closes, Erdogan continues the closure. It's quite possible that Orthodox Christianity will disappear from Turkey before it reaches its 2 millennia anniversary in just over a decade. That's really frightening. So in addition to talking a little bit about Rubin's testimony, which again I commend to you in its entirety, but that one section in particular has resonance for us tonight, I also just want to speak briefly about something that I'm sure, again, George will talk about, but is a July 2025 letter that went from Turkey's foreign minister to Parliament on our topic tonight. So really, Rubin's testimony before Congress in June kind of, foreshadowed this letter. And the big news about the letter is that there is no breaking news there. It's really just more of the same, but it is, it's alarming to hear it repeated yet again in the face of the international dialogue that's going on. So I've not personally read the letter, by the way, and I think not only is it not readily available, but I'm sure that it's also in the native language, so I wouldn't be able to read it anyway. But I'm going to here rely on recent reports just a week or two ago in Nordic Monitor. And again, this is easily found online if you'd like to read it yourself, and I do commend it to you. Anyway, that article reports that in the July 2025 letter, Turkey continues to deny the ecumenical status of the Patriarchate. According to the author of the article, who has seen the letter informed Turkish lawmakers that the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople holds no special status in the international world beyond its limited role as the spiritual leader of the Greek Orthodox minority in Turkey. So again, very constraining. According to the article, the letter made clear Turkey's position that the ecumenical title that is used by the Patriarchate carries no legal or political significance under Turkish or international law. Again, this is just at odds. I mean, it just really cannot be reconciled with international authority. Instead, the letter framed the issue as an internal theological designation within the Orthodox Christian world. The article reports that the letter cites historical records to state that the 1923 Treaty of Lausanne, which of course, laid the foundation for the modern Turkish Republic, contains no provisions regarding the status of the Patriarchate, and instead the letter refers to the proceedings of the Lausanne Peace Conference in January 1923, where it was agreed that the Patriarchate would no longer deal with political or administrative matters, but would instead be limited strictly to religious affairs. The letter reportedly states that, and again, here I'm going to quote, the title ecumenical, meaning universal, is a concept concerning the spiritual relationship between an institution representing a recognized faith system and its believers. So again, very, very restrictive. The letter continues, in other words, it's an internal matter of the Orthodox world and theology. In this context, the ecumenical character as a spiritual title in relations with other Orthodox churches pertaining to Christian theology and studies, and does not entail any rights or privileges in our country or internationally. Bottom line, very disturbing. According to the news report, the letter acknowledges that the Ecumenical Patriarch, Bartholomew I, occasionally attends international meetings, some of them with Turkey's participation. However, the letter apparently stresses that in these contexts, his interventions are confined to, quote, spiritual matters. The letter also notes that in Turkey, the Patriarch does not use the ecumenical title in official correspondence or in contacts with state authorities. So again, this is this very one-sided depiction. The letter further adds that Ankara itself does not use the designation in its dealings with the Patriarchate, and the letter states that it's not obligated to do so, invoking a 2010 opinion by the Council of Europe's Venice Commission. Again, we're going to hear a fair amount about that, I suspect. In any event, That opinion, according to the Turkish foreign minister, confirmed that Turkey is not legally bound to recognize the title. Of course, the Patriarchate, based in Istanbul, is internationally recognized as the first among equals within the Orthodox Christian world, and it holds spiritual primacy over the 300 million believers around the globe. For centuries, obviously, the title has been in use. Ecumenical Patriarch, a designation that was adopted during the Byzantine era and has continued to this day. However, the July 2025 letter from the Turkish foreign minister to Parliament takes the position that, and again I'm going to quote here, the title ecumenical, meaning universal, is a concept concerning the spiritual relations between an institution representing a recognized faith system and its believers. I gave you that quote earlier. Again, very bottom line, very at odds with reality. The Turkish foreign minister basically seeks to justify Turkey's position by pointing to an opinion, the opinion I mentioned earlier, by the Venice Commission. But in fact, a careful reading of that opinion yields a very, very different result. To be sure, the Commission, refrains from, opining on anything, that might be considered theological judgment. But the opinion unequivocally, plainly, in simple and straightforward words, emphasizes that the Orthodox Church's right to use its own titles, including ecumenical, as part of the religious freedom and institutional autonomy under Article 9 of the European Convention on Human Rights, a treaty by which Turkey is bound. The Venice Commission opinion explicitly states that the Patriarchate must be free to use the ecumenical designation. And the opinion also explicitly criticizes the 2007 ruling by the Turkish Supreme Court of Appeals, where that court declared the ecumenical title had, quote, no legal basis in Turkey. The Venice Commission called it an inappropriate intrusion. The court called it an inappropriate intrusion. The Venice Commission observed that secular courts are not competent to decide these kinds of theological questions. And further, the Venice Commission observed that secular courts are not competent, and it rejected Turkey's reliance on the Treaty of Lausanne to deny the ecumenical title. The Commission reiterated that the treaty is silent on the matter and contains no prohibition against the use of the title. The Commission added that preventing or obstructing the Patriarchate's use of the title cannot be justified under the European Convention on Human Rights, because it would fail the test of, all of us who are lawyers in the room know, the test of proportionality, right? So again, just an across-the-board rejection by the Venice Commission of the position that Turkey was putting forward at that time and that Turkey continues to advocate. The Nordic Monitor article notes that by omitting these critical points, the Turkish foreign minister's July 2025 letter grossly and absurdly paints this picture of the Venice Commission's position. The letter essentially indicates that the Commission has endorsed Turkey's restrictive approach to the issue, but in fact, the Commission criticized precisely the type of approach that Turkey has been advocating and is continuing to advocate. Turkey is just really trying to hold the line on the issue, despite what I described earlier as these renewed international efforts and renewed international scrutiny. The letter makes clear that Turkey continues to be plagued by deep concern, and I think this is really at the heart of the issue. Turkey is concerned that recognizing the Patriarchate's ecumenical name could, in U.S. legal parlance, create a slippery slope, leading to demands for international privileges that are comparable to those of the Vatican. That's the big concern. The Patriarchate has, of course, played a leading role in Orthodox Christian affairs, recently, most prominently, in granting independence to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, a move that was fiercely opposed by Moscow, of course, no surprise. As the Nordic Monitor notes, the decision infuriated Erdogan's neo-nationalist allies who are often aligned with Russia, Iran, and China against the West. Western governments and the European Union, among others, have repeatedly, over the years, urged Turkey to recognize the Patriarchate's ecumenical status and its to reopen the seminary. The Greek Orthodox Church brought up the matter following Patriarch Bartholomew's recent meeting with President Trump. And in response, President Trump, in turn, raised the issue in talks with Erdogan at the White House in September, according to news reports. According to news reports, Erdogan stated, and again, here I quote, "We are ready to do whatever is incumbent upon us regarding the school," promising that he would discuss the matter with the Patriarch upon his return to Turkey. Of course, promises like that are nothing new. Over the years, Erdogan and his government have repeatedly made similar vows to the Christian minority and to the international community in the past. Then they've assiduously failed to deliver on the promises. The Patriarch still lacks legal personality, forcing it to operate through foundations. Again, we'll hear more about this from George, subject to state oversight. As the Nordic Monitor puts it, quote, "By selectively invoking the Venice Commission, Ankara seeks to bolster its legal justification, highlighting only the Venice Commission's acknowledgement that Turkey itself has no obligation to use the title, yet critics note that the same opinion also emphasized the Patriarchate's right to self-designation and warned against state interference, points conspicuously absent from the July 2025 letter. The conclusion: for the Patriarchate, the dispute underscores the fragile balance that the Patriarchate must continue to maintain, as it has done for decades, asserting its ecumenical role in global Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, while carefully navigating Turkey's restrictive domestic framework. Those of us who are in the room must heed that warning and must embrace that call to action. We must rededicate ourselves to the cause with educational programs like the program tonight, with op-eds, both online and in print, and with letters to the editor, and in communications with top officials in the legislative branch and in the executive branch, both in this country and in Turkey, and with global authorities. I'm personally dedicating myself tonight to work closely under Georgia's leadership to mobilize the bar and the bench here in the United States and elsewhere around the world. There are at least 300 million Orthodox Christian believers around the globe who are counting on us to vindicate the rule of law and their human rights. Thank you.
You've heard from the state of the art, the best that the U.S. legal community can offer, the best that the Bar Association can offer in terms of the state of the situation. You can't get any more experienced than the judge. You can't get any higher than the judge on this issue. And so now comes the boring part, because this is, no matter how I try to dress it up, it's a legal presentation. So, aspirational speeches are good. The Archons have lamented lack of legal identity for 50 years. And so now the chairs are taking a more aggressive approach, and this is the beginning of a more aggressive approach. So the paper is boring. If you really want boring, you can read the 54 pages of detailed legal analysis, anybody that wants one. But this is going to be general, and I'm going to try to avoid being boring as much as possible when dealing with legal issues. So the major risk here is the boredom. But I've done a PowerPoint, which I'm told you have to do, and I'm also told you have to open up with a joke to lighten them up. Lighten them up with a joke. So those of you that don't speak Greek will have to have it explained by those that do. So what is the Greek word for deadline? The Greek word for deadline is avrio. Okay. To explain it to those of you, you know what I'm talking about. So, anyway, let's introduce the issue. The word that comes to mind is continuity. 1,700 years before the Turkish state, before the Ottoman Empire. And this continuity is symbolic. It's important. The word orthodoxy implies continuity. It's the Byzantine legacy. 1,700 years, and yet the Patriarchate is at the whim and mercy of the Turkish state. Risks are everywhere. Risks can happen in an instant. A 1,000-year-old church can be converted into a mosque. I've been to Fanari 3 times. Every time is more shocking than the rest. And to hear the call to prayer, to see the Muslim things in the church, tells you how suddenly risks can approach and destroy. And once something is destroyed, it may never come back. And that's not the only risk. So what can we do? Well, there's political power, and there's many people in the Archons and in our community that exercise political power. There's force. I mean, force today makes the difference. Cyprus, Ukraine. But really, it's rule of law, world public opinion on law, legal power, and legal process. The key issues here, when it comes to legal authority, legal avenues to address all these problems, are the issues of property and the issue of legal identity. These are the 2 legal issues that the Archons and everybody that deals with religious freedom primarily has dealt with. There's a 3rd issue, persecution and attacks and violence, but the 2 issues that the Archons have been involved with and that our legal committee has been involved with is property and legal identity. We're going to focus on legal identity today and why it's absolutely critical to whether we're going to survive in another few years. So, the Patriarchate today. The Patriarch, His All Holiness Bartholomeos, in his visit 2025, said, we survive. Despite multiple hardships, we survive. And he said it emotionally. And yet, the Patriarchate is withering. It is shrinking to less than 1,500 people. The 1,700-year-old Patriarchate does not exist as a legal body, as a legal entity in the law. Call to action. We thrive here. Our archdioceses, our parishes. We say Christos Anesti, we pray, we baptize our kids. And yet the mother church withers and dies. Where it all came from, right? Where 1,700 years of sacrifice caused us to have what we have today. That's dying and dying slowly. So does it matter? Does it matter? Is it incumbent upon us to fight? Well, you know, power and strength are not just political and military. Greece was very weak during Turkish occupation, politically and militarily, and yet its power arose from its history, from its culture, and from the church. So let us not forget and think that this is something that is a minor detail. Tremendous power there and tremendous importance. Orthodoxy continuity is critical by its nature. Next slide. By the way, the previous slide showed the closing of the school of Halki. So you can't train priests because private schools, religious schools can't be private. You can't bring priests in. The only country where the Patriarchate, a religious organization, cannot train its own priests. So what can you do? You can't bring them in, you can't give them visas, and you can't train them. So the Patriarchate today is an institution where our ecumenical patriarch has tremendous respect around the world by virtue of who he is, by virtue of his sacred continuity. And yet, today, the Patriarchate has no bank account, owns no property, cannot inherit property, cannot receive bequests, cannot sue in contract, tort, or damage, cannot invest in real estate, cannot form subsidiaries overseas, cannot have the clergy it wants, the parishes it wants, cannot put the clergy and priests in the boards of certain properties that are controlled by foundations. It can't own trademarks or patents. It can't have subsidiaries. And what it is, it's not status quo. This limbo is erosion. See, if you don't do anything, it doesn't remain the same. Evidence is eroding. So this is the heartfelt plea. You know, are we going to let the place where people died by candlelight to preserve what we have on the streets for thousands of years? It's really a heartfelt pledge to stop inaction and stop the broad solicitudes and aspirational speeches and take a more aggressive, intentional approach. Is the search for legal identity part of the solution to all of these? Imagine it was your parish. You baptized your kids there, you got married there, you buried your family members there, your children go to Sunday school, and you don't own your church anymore. You don't have a bank account. Sunday school is closed. The kids are running around in front, they can't get in. The clergy you want can't be allowed to operate or teach. The roof leaks, the door's broken, there's no plumbing, you can't fix it. Your cathedral's a mosque. Nobody can donate anything. You can't own it. If somebody gives you, if an iconographer wants to give a sacred relic, like happened with Pope John Paul, the Turks own it. You can't have it. No real estate owned or invested. See, we don't realize the importance of this because we're protected by the First Amendment. We don't know what we don't have because we don't, the mazlipi, it's not, we don't miss it because we don't know its absence. If we knew its absence, if we felt its absence, and this leads to something I'm going to say later, we would realize how important it is. The archdiocese and our parish, as we know them, could not exist in Turkey today. Could not exist in Turkey. Imagine, for example, the New York Directorate of Oversight of Religious Operations oversaw everything the archdiocese does in New York. Every action, every step. So, next slide. The importance of legal identity Is it a solution? First concept that needs to be understood is the concept of standing. If law is the door, standing is the key. It's something that we lawyers understand. Standing is your ability to use the weapon and defense of the law to fight oppression, system oppression and government interference. It is the ability to use the court systems. The role of courts and justice systems depend upon the ability to have standing. The only way that we can have standing to appear is to have legal identity. If we don't have legal identity, we cannot assert legal rights against government oppression. We don't have legal identity through foundations, as you're going to hear later. All our cases in the European Court of Human Rights and other courts have been foundation cases. This is apples and oranges, because foundation cases can never lead to the broad spectrum of religious freedom. We're constrained. Even when good cases come along, religious freedom is dicta. It's to the side. It's not foundationally. So, in the United States, this leads us to the word association. If you look at the Pennsylvania, New York corporate business law, you'll see somebody can incorporate, have a corporation, you can have a limited liability company, you can have a general partnership, but you can be an association, a group of people that have a common purpose or goal or objective. An association, loosely defined as that. An association has legal status by operation of the law in every state and everywhere in the European Union. You are a legal entity by virtue of being an association. People group together for a common purpose. An association, under law of every single country, has legal identity and can appear court to defend its rights. The Archdiocese is a 501c3 association. It also has a foundation. The foundation controls property, assets, and real estate. If something happened to the Archdiocese, some violation of its freedoms, some attack on its person, some legal issue, we wouldn't go through the foundations. That's not the way to approach that issue. Foundations limited to the property for the benefit. And so the real issue here is legal identity, and being an association allows the decisions that we need to have made against us or for us to be made by courts, not by government entities. It's all connected. Standing, association status, legal identity, access to courts. Next paragraph. We understand this in the United States very strongly. First Amendment. You can see it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise or abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievance. That part connects to the top part. Establishment of religion cannot exist without the right of religious groups to assemble, petition, and seek redress. That means to have legal identity, to have association status. This is in the Turkish constitution, by the way. But what matters is not what's written. The best dictators have had great bills of rights. What matters is what's done. This is the Turkish constitution. They have similar provisions. The United States makes it very clear that association status is essential to freedom of religion. Our law makes it clear that the fixed star in our law is religious freedom, and legal identity can never be separated from religious freedom. This was part of our history in the United States. The Puritans would attack the Quakers. One religious group attacked the other. So the core value of this country was religious freedom. And in order to have religious freedom, you had to have legal identity. Separation of church and state. Now, Turkey has the same constitutional provisions, but doesn't exactly have separation of church and state. There's the Diyanet, which sort of blends the two, but in any event, has enough provisions in there to guarantee these same freedoms. And yet the Turkish constitution, as we'll see, is not followed. So the next slide, please. So to understand this issue better and why we've been beating our head against the wall, we have to understand a little bit about foundations under Turkish law so we can compare them to associations that I've been talking about. Foundation or vakif is a something that exists through the Ottoman world. It's a very unusual creature. The foundations own and control property of religious groups and minority religious groups. They are a legal entity. They are governed to a particular special law, the law of foundations. Everything they do is governed by the General Director of Foundations, Minority Religious Foundations, which is part of the Ministry of the Interior and other ministries. Foundations are what controls all our properties in Turkey. Foundations own our bank accounts. When the Archons want to send money to the Patriarchate, I'm told by legal counsel Paris Assanakis that it goes into the foundation for the Church of St. George of the Fanar. We don't have a bank account. Foundations control everything we do. We're the beneficiaries. Think of it like a trust where the trustees, the government, and we're the beneficiaries, except that we have much less power than the beneficiaries of a trust. I'll talk, if you want to get into that in the paper. So, our interest in property and foundation cases are property administration cases, but that's all we file. And we can never get to legal identity through foundation cases. The path proposed here is the path to legal identity is through the proper association case. Next. Can we be an association under Turkish law? Well, isn't that an interesting question? Can we be an association under Turkish law? Well, yes. The Turkish law is very similar to our US and EU structure. The Turkish association law is very similar to our law 5. First of all, the Constitution promises religious freedom. The Turkish Constitution, equality under the law, religious freedom, no discrimination. End of story. And the Turkish Constitution incorporates the European Convention. Okay? So, clearly, the Constitution allows us to have legal identity. What is the Turkish association law? I'm not going to read you the 15-page analysis. I'm going to tell you. Law 5253 allows legal identity to religious groups and nonprofits. What about the Turkish Civil Code? That's the only thing that could govern it. Section 4721 allows legal identity to religious groups, and we can form legal identity and association status. What's going on here? There is an article, Article 5 of the Turkish Association Law. It says if an association is going to engage in breach of law, attack on sovereignty, public order, bad morals, well, then we're not going to give it association status. Problem is, what we're doing, what the patriarchy is doing, is expressly allowed by the Constitution. It can't be against the law and public morals, by definition. And in any event, if it was, the court should determine that when it applies for a charter. There's a provision, if you are against public morals, show the evidence that this organization is against public morals. When it files its charter to become, there's provision in the Turkish Civil Code that the court can say, well, you're an evil organization. Well, we can't possibly be unqualified under the Turkish Civil Code, under the Turkish Constitution, under the Code of Civil Procedure. So you're all sitting there wondering, what the heck's going on? The Archons, the whole world's fighting for 50 years for religious identity. What's happening? Well, next slide. Part of the problem, like I said, has been, well, we can't file anything as association. We've never developed a strong association case. We're filing foundation cases. Foundation cases are what we call in law in rem, related to property. And in Turkey, it's even worse. Foundation, the property has the legal identity. Association cases, as you can see, the broad scope of religious freedoms encompasses property rights, but not the reverse. And that's why we can never get to legal identity through property administration cases, the full rights of the Patriarchate. Like I said, the Archdiocese would not file the case through the Archdiocese Property Foundation for its legal rights. We don't own anything, we can't control anything, and everything we do as a foundation is overseen by the Turkish government, which means we can never get to legal identity that way. Next slide, please. If the Turkish Constitution allows it, the Turkish Association Law allows it, the Turkish Civil Code allows it, what is the basis for the denial of legal identity by Turkey? We're not clear. We're not clear. It's hard to respond to arguments which are vague and unclear, as you're going to see. They're very unclear. And the ones that have been articulated are completely rebuttable. It's just we haven't done a great job, or we've been reticent to do a great job to attack them directly and legally. The denial of religious identity is inconsistent with all international laws, all international institutions, all conventions, all treaties, and all declarations. Every single one of them. Every single one of them says religious minority groups should have legal identity, end of story. And Turkish law says the same thing. Beginning with the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights, European Convention, which Turkey is a member of, and Article 9, Article 11. For those that are not lawyers, it's an international court. There's the Council of Europe. The holdings are binding upon Turkey. Very clear. Religious minorities have legal personality. No prohibition even on filing for a corporation, for corporation status, for association status. You can't even make it harder. They've recognized the Patriarchate as an NGO, as a non-government organization. Community issue, they say, is critical. I'm summarizing 70 cases over the years. Community is important. The Venice Commission and the provisions are mandatory. What about the other organization, the OSCE, and its Office of Human Rights, ODIHR, and so forth? Another institution, not a court, not binding, but very persuasive by the ECHR. What does it say? And what has the United States said in the Helsinki Commission that interacts? Make a long story short. In the guidelines for legal personality of religious institutions and belief communities, among others, it very clearly says religious communities must have legal identity. All the OSCE, and I've read hundreds of pages, I describe them, clear as a bell. This is very persuasive. This is a very persuasive organization. The ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights, Turkey is a member, takes these into account. However, the OSCE has never said clearly in any formal resolution, parliamentary action, that specifically the Patriarchate, Ecumenical Patriarchate in Turkey has legal identity and must have it. It's never been made that clear. What about the UN? Something that the judge knows a lot more than I do. The Charter, the Human Rights Office, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, minority declarations. All of them make it very clear. Legal identity, legal identity, legal identity, religious minorities group, legal identity, First Amendment type stuff. The Human Rights Council did its Universal Periodic Review of Turkey. It was published in February 2025. And this is where they do a review. Make a long story short, these reviews are reviews of the country, religious freedom. There's over 100 organizations, third-party submissions. And they said, well, you need legal identity. Well, Turkey gets to reply. And they said three things, to summarize. The Lausanne Treaty, you can have it, Lausanne Treaty. Foundations enough, well, foundations. And the last one is, we're improving, we're reforming. Okay, so that was their, that's what they said. That was their answer. Next one. How do you respond to that? I'm going to respond to each one of those very carefully. At this point, something interesting happens last year. Two Greek Orthodox clerics, Mamasis and Kapsoglu, want to be on the board of the Agia Analypsis Church Foundation. Agia Analypsis Church, not owned by the members and the Christians, it's owned by the foundation, controlled by the Turkish. So imagine your priest has to appeal to the government of DC to be on your pastor, some of the reverends here, some of the pastors here, have to ask the government for permission to sit on the church board. You know, our regulations in the Archdiocese allow every priest to be de facto member of our board. You know what we can do here. Can't do it. Clerics can't be on foundation boards. It's inappropriate. Okay? The Constitutional Court said, well, first of all, the Lausanne Treaty doesn't bar this. Second of all, and I'll explain why. Second of all, it's a rule of law issue, as the judge said. The judges should determine. And third of all, there's a right under religious freedom to freedom of association. Huh? Constitutional Court of Turkey. Freedom of association. The first time I've seen that. I've seen it. Directly going to the point. But now, can they say that we have legal identity status? Can they make a what? No, it's a foundation case. This is dealing with a particular right for them to sit on a foundation board, and the discretion of the director of the foundation to determine who sits on the board of a foundation, the property being owned by the foundation, and the Greek Orthodox are the. So this is again a foundation case. So the court did not hold that the Patriarchate had legal identity. But this is a good case, is it not? I mean, this now, has it been implemented? As of the time of the paper, it has not been implemented. And you know, there's big problems with something that the judge knows a lot about, with rulings of the Turkish Constitutional Court that you see there on the top. The bottom shows Turkish lawyers and judges on the street rioting and screaming and yelling. Over 2,000 judges were replaced by judges. The average age, I think, was 24, partisans. Bar associations have been attacked. There's been purging of jurists, attacks on lawyers, people are jailed, mayor of Istanbul and all this. You have a court of cessation, I'm going very fast, that is at the other high court, which doesn't implement decisions, is filled with partisans. ECHR rulings are not implemented. It's one of the highest countries where things are not implemented. So even if the Constitutional Court makes a decision, it's not necessarily going to be true that it's going to be followed, because the government interferes and the government doesn't follow rule of law. So the holding, even though it didn't hold that the Patriarchate has legal entity, because it couldn't, it said that religious groups have the right to association, and that's in our Constitution. And guess what? It is. It's in the Turkish Constitution. This is interesting because the decision of the Constitutional Court in 1971 that closed Halki said that religious groups cannot have a private religious school. There's no such thing as private religious schools. Halki closed 1971. Now in 2024, the same different constitutional court held that religious groups have a right to association. I propose that the two are totally inconsistent. That Mamassis makes the initial justification for closing Halki incorrect and a violation. And it says it's a violation of the Turkish Constitution. It establishes that it is a violation of the Turkish Constitution. Whether Erdogan and his people who control the courts, will do anything about it, we'll see. Slide 13. We start with U.S. policy again in our action plan. The Archons have been talking to politicians, prominent individuals here who have dealt politically with this issue in aspirational speeches, in how we want to relate to this issue. But this is a lot more closer to the bone here in the U.S. than we have been making it out to be. I watched Secretary Pompeo receiving the Athenagoras Award a few months ago make that statement. Our nation would not exist without religious freedom. What drove the first settlers to the incredibly crazy, risky decision. And then the International Religious Freedom Act, which is required to be the policy of the United States, undergirds the very origin and existence of the United States. Undergirds, and so when we talk and when we frame the issue, right, politically to the politicians, this is not about some place over there and some, religious group that you don't know about. This is about your church. This is about your parish. This is about your freedom. This is about what is the core of the United States. That's how you frame it. With the Orthodox and there's something in Turkey. This is your right. That's how you frame it. So, at this point, there are risks on the horizon. Next one. That require, and I'm very clear on the paper, we cannot defend against these risks unless we have legal identity. And I'll make my point why. This is Putin and Patriarch Kirill, who is furious over the autocephaly to the Ukrainian church. Kirill was KGB with Putin in the 70s and the 80s. He actually has a code name, Agent Mikhailov. Kirill wants the Ecumenical Patriarchate. Erdogan and Putin, as the judge said, have certain, love things going on. That's the humble fanar on the top. At the bottom is Kirill's house, worth, $30, $40 million. Look at where a patriarch has, and look at what Kirill has. There is in there an icon of Putin, done in traditional Orthodox icon that the soldiers have to espouse and kiss. I have Africa. 3 years ago, the Patriarch of Alexandria came, was crying, was in tears, because they're going to every single community, Orthodox community in Africa, and they've taken over 200 Greek Orthodox churches and communities very simply by giving them a school, giving them money, giving them a church, giving them, and having them convert one by one. And they're taking over every single a portion of the ecumenical. How do you defend against that? What if the brilliant Archon John Zavitsanos said at the last meeting, the position of Erdogan and Putin and Kirill is that the ecumenical title is the place, not the person. Whoever's there. So what happens? What happens if they declare, God forbid something happened to His Holiness, Kirill ecumenical? What are you going to do? Are you going to go to the ECHR? Eternal religious issue. Are you going to sue through a foundation? Foundation. What are you going to do? If there's subtle interference, if there's promotion, if there's defamation, the access is the Turkish courts. You can't get to the Turkish courts. There's no way you can get to the Turkish courts. So place matters, and the Turks, as Mr. Zavitsano says, they play the long game. And that is why, one of the reasons we cannot address the risks, including this existential risk. And if something's gone, it may never come back. Look at Cyprus, look at Ukraine now. Look at all these, it's gone. Look at Hagia Sophia. How are you going to get that back? It's an established mosque. Inaction yields to results that can never be undone. Next slide, please. What are the arguments that have been indicated by the Turkish side against legal identity? Morality, public order, integrity of the state. What we're doing, what the Patriarchate is doing, and there's no evidence to the contrary, is what the Turkish constitution allows. Nothing more, nothing less. Certainly none of that. Foundations are enough. Of course they're not enough. The courts have said that. Everybody says that. Foundations, and the Turks say foundations are property-based. The Treaty of Lausanne, that treaty there that created peace with Greece, it says that Greek Orthodox are allowed to exist. So what? That says allowed to exist. Doesn't say legal identity. Yeah, it's a floor. It's a floor. It's not a ceiling. Every single legal brain that has addressed this issue has said that's a floor. It doesn't mean you don't get to apply any other treaties, conventions, or laws after. It's a floor. And the Constitutional Court of Turkey said, no, what are you talking about? Just because they're allowed to exist, they can't have more rights? Why do we have the same equal rights as the Protestants then, who also can't have legal identity? Do we have any more rights? Well, no, you have the same rights. Well, what is the Treaty of Lausanne? Not only doesn't it give additional rights, it takes away rights. Inconsistent. The ecumenical argument. Okay. You don't want to recognize it? You don't want to recognize it. How does ecumenical give political power? That's what they're afraid of. Ecumenical. We're not saying we want to have political power over the citizens of Turkey. We're not saying we want to have political power as a state actor outside Turkey. This is a recognition made throughout the world, a righteous recognition. If you don't want to decide it, but how does legal identity? If you recognize legal identity, you don't have to recognize ecumenical status, although you should. There's no connection between the two. Well, if we recognize legal identity, we recognize ecumenical status. That is ludicrous. That argument can't even be articulated. Every single law has said, from the ECHR to the UN, to the OSCE, EU, internal UPR submissions, and the Turkish constitution has said that there is the right to legal identity. And yet no articulable argument has done. Now, the other, by the way, is reciprocity with Greece. Well, the Greek agent suspicion is agent of Greece, the Greek thing. Well, then the Catholics are agents of Italy, and the Protestants are agents of the UK, and all Jewish people are agents of Israel. That doesn't fly. There's no evidence of that we're agents of Greece. And the quid pro quo, the treaty does say Greece has to do the same. Well, Greece does recognize legal identity for religious groups, Muslim groups. Is it perfect? No, but it does. That argument also fails, and that's the only other potential argument that could be raised. Next. The argument to Erdogan, some people are saying we shouldn't do anything. This is risky. Don't file for legal identity. First of all, and I don't mention it there, we're saying a lot of these things in the foundation cases. We're fighting the Turkish lobbies head to head, saying all kinds of things. We're joining in organizations that say you're abusing us, you're doing all these horrible things, filing a case on legal identity, and people are afraid to push the envelope. I don't think it adds that much more threat. But look at what they could do if Erdogan could be convinced. Improve the rule of law index ranking. Companies and businesses and people look at this rule of law index the judge referred to determine the risk, the political and rule of law risk of going into a country. And that's terrifying. It's existential. It's what Greece was several years ago. Who am I going to have to pay off? What am I going to have to do if I have a problem? I don't care how good the business environment is. Some government official can come take everything. Business, appease the Turkish judiciary. You have a huge problem by trying to wrest power from the Turkish judiciary and the Turkish lawyers. Give them the right to oversee. Do some rule of law on this issue. We're not saying that we can do whatever we want. If you have a problem, if the Ministry of the Interior or the director has a problem with the Greek foundation or the government, take them to court. Where one party with legal identity can appear against another party and give the Turkish lawyers and judges the right that they have to determine evidence. You have more oversight by the courts by giving us legal identity, Mr. Turkish minister. You say, look at our great cultural heritage of Hagia Sophia. The Patriarchate is a thriving Patriarchate, is great cultural heritage. Support it, build it. Let it build schools and institutions. Support your sacred secular tradition. That's what Ataturk is about. You have to go bow to his tomb. You can't mention anything about his name. Consistent with the Constitutional Court. And most of the rights are to fix the plumbing, to invest, to have a bank account, to do routine stuff. We're not, exercising legal, routine, contractual, and business rights, legal identity. So, another point that I want to make is our patriarch has not been, let's see, which slide is that? And I'm almost done here. Our patriarch has not been a political being, not like the Pope even. He's a spiritual leader. He's never sought political power. He's a spiritual leader who preaches dignity, equality, and respect. So even more so with our patriarch, who has not shown any indication to do this. The potential path is always, and I'm going to finish up with this, the choice of His Holiness. What he decides. The Archons act as the line of defense for His Holiness. That's who we are, and that's what we have to do. There's no other source. He doesn't have the Swiss Guard. But we should be prepared, shouldn't we? Even if we decide, we should be prepared. We should explore this issue. There were rumblings when we started this. Should we even talk to the Turkish lawyers in the ABA? Maybe some Turkish group will find out and do something to the patriarch. So we have to be ready. And, the risks of inaction have to be measured against the risks of action. Inaction is loss, not status quo. Engagement committees have to work better with the Turkish lawyers. We have to work better with each other. We have to work better with the lawyers in Greece. there are multiple cases that can be brought here. The main case is the ECHR, supported by specific declarations from the OSCE. More engagement of all the great United Nations bodies and organizations, the UN, amici. There's a problem with ECHR. It's not standing. There's a provision in the European Court that standing is given. You don't need to have standing. Any organization has de facto standing. Exhaustion is a problem, however. To raise this issue, we have to go through the entire internal Turkish court. However, there's a futility provision. If we can prove that it's futile to do that, we may be allowed to go and seek resolution of this issue. And it is futile. How can we exhaust the issue of legal identity if we can file for legal identity? Right? So there's a futility provision in the ECHR that we can argue. And last but not least, I raised the issue of whether we can bring a declaratory action. I'm getting a little technical here, but I'm going to end it with this. In the Turkish courts under the Turkish Declaratory Judgment Act, based on the latest Mamasis case, to declare that the Patriarchate has legal identity. Of course, it's going to be rejected, but it's another final thing. So, we have a clear case that Archons, especially, and this is an Archon presentation, have to act, is not an issue. More important, however, we have to determine how to act. We have an obligation to figure out the details, not just make speeches, how to act. Okay, that's all I have for today. Any questions? Okay. I'll take this.
Such energy, passion, knowledge, experience. If we can just channel that, I'm sure it will lead to great results, but we have to keep it up. This is the first educational forum that the Patriarchal Properties and Legal Issues Committee has put on with regard to this critical issue of legal identity for the Ecumenical Patriarchate under Turkish law. We hope to be sponsoring more of these events. Many people have provided assistance to put this event on, and I wanted to recognize them and to thank them. First and foremost, our commander, Dr. Anthony Limbarakis, and the executive committee have given us great support and have promised further support for doing much of the same. In the Archdiocese office, two people have provided quite a bit of assistance to us. Leah Katz, as always, as she has provided all the administrative support that we need. And John Mandala has provided his creative design work to give us the design of the announcement and the flyers. We met Andy, and I guess he's no longer here, but he provided assistance all along the way as to where we should hold this, how many people we should expect, people that we should invite, and we're grateful to him and for all the things that he's done for us. Obviously, this was an idea of George, but it was totally supported by the chairman and the vice chairman of our committee, Joe Kokolakis and Ted Kakayanis, without whom we wouldn't have had this tonight. So we obviously have to thank them, and we know that they're committed to continue this effort in the future. Our speakers have absolutely wonderful. Your Honor, and I love saying Your Honor, we are so deeply appreciative of you have come here today to share with us your wisdom, your knowledge, your judgment, your experience, and most importantly, your offer to help. And George, your document, he doesn't want to call this anything because he's not finished with it yet, but he's bound it. I'm really surprised that you've bound it. I call it the opus of George's opus. If anybody wants a copy of it, please see me or George. We'll get you a copy. One of my dear friends, I think he's still in this room, Tom Caruso, who's not, there he is. He's not Greek, but he's Italian, and that we'll take him. He was the former president of the University Club, among many other things. He is a great believer in religious freedom, and he sponsors affairs like this, and he sponsored us. We have this room today because of Tom. And I also want to thank very much the University Club staff with whom I work closely. Michelle Wilson, who's the director of events, and her staff have seamlessly allowed us to put this event on, and we thank them for that. So, the last thing I want to say is we have chocolate chip cookies and maybe brownies, and we have coffee, both decaf and high test. And thank you very much, and hope you enjoy that.